Why didn't we decide to use a green roof?
We don't have that many roof areas to do it, but the other thing, the evolution of green roofs too. I think it wasn't 4 years ago when we first started this project that we were really looking at that type of technology. And the roof at the top, we had done studies. There's an uplift characteristic just from the roof, and the roof has to be ballast. And the technology on the 44th floor wouldn't have sustained a green roof. It's also mechanical space. That's where the generators are located. That's where the water tanks are. That's where the elevator machine rooms land. It's just too much mechanical in an environment like this. Green roofs have been embraced in some of the other buildings where there are lower structures to build them on, and you will see them in some of the other buildings, especially if you go down to the Skyscraper Museum and see some of the other buildings now in design.
Actually, the wind uplift forces on the roof are tremendous, and they probably would have sucked the grass right off the roof. Yeah, literally. In fact, the concrete pavers that are up there have to be held down with straps in certain corners of the roof. And they're 2 foot by 2 foot by 2 inches thick.
You're laughing, but that's, when people were looking at green buildings and when they said, well, we're going to build a green building, it's like, well, why don't you apply what we do in Pittsburgh or what we do in Frankfurt here in New York City? There's different climatology, and so it doesn't really work that way. And part of what you needed was a client that was willing to explore that and look beyond it and move forward. But I think a lot of times people are looking for these razzle-dazzle things like the grass on the roof, and it's again, it would direct you back to the more practical things that just sort of get the job done. And the proof is in the pudding in terms of how much we're going to save in electric and water.
And we have the reflective roof pavers too, so they help.
I think also it's about water conservation, and then it's about you want to avoid sealed areas with green roofs above everything else, and you're collecting the water as well. Yeah, that's the big point. You want to collect the water. You don't want to have the water just to disappear into the drainage. We collect it, so I think that's really the answer. I think you do one or the other.
Its other value is the view from the building, so they put Central Park next to the building.
My question is more prosaic. The lower floors, I presume, were completely gutted in the sense that there were no executives or business activities taking place while the central floor was being rebuilt, so that they were elsewhere. Also, you talk about the fact that you separated the facade from what's been put in the center. What I'm not clear about is whether there are any special environmental elements that now have to be applied to the fourth floor, whether they occupied or being used, aside from the central lobby area, the periphery of it, appears to the offices.
I'll take the first question and then I'll defer to the second question. There were a lot of people who said you'll never be able to do this. Forget about the green building, just an overbuild on a landmark building in New York City. There are cheaper alternatives, rent the building down the block, buy the building across the street. There's an emotional attachment to this building. So one of the other chief impediments was how do you get those people that are emotionally attached to their office out of this building to get to another building? And we contemplated whether we could build a building. And in some of the earlier schemes, before the Foster scheme, and remember this is a building that's 80 years old that was always contemplated to have a tower above it. So there were many attempts at other designs before this one came along. It just was too complicated. It wasn't safe, and it didn't make sense. So we were lucky in that space became available that was very Hearstian in its approach that I could move the people out of and into. But it also started the change of getting them out of closed environments and into a little bit open or more open environment. Because ultimately, there's full transparency and openness to the ground. So the other building was not functionally working for us anymore. It's 80 years old. You had punch-through air conditioning systems, and you run it across the street with the mail. There weren't enough conference rooms. We're a media company where you didn't have the AV technology that you needed. It just was very rigged. And here the best of take the Hearst executives that used to be into that building back in, they say, oh, there's my old office. They feel that we didn't erase everything. They're getting back to green. We didn't erase everything that was. We actually captured the best of it and then built upon it. So that, just what I think Alex talked about earlier on, the greatest thing you could do is to work in an environment that's already developed. So we didn't take over more land. We worked with the existing land. And then we worked with the existing facade. And we saved that architecture of its day. And then we actually gave it a facelift and made it come alive again. But the building has an emotional attachment for those people, and it'll have a new functionality that really will lift it up and create a new Hearst within a space that they were always a part of.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind taking a crack at the second part. The floor-to-floor heights were 11 foot. It was 11 foot 9 inches from floor to floor, so it really didn't allow you to do much with it. But 3 of those floors were preserved. The ground floor, the second ground floor, second and third floor have some back of house components within them. But even making those floors work was incredibly difficult. Getting the modern day mechanical, electrical in those floors was difficult. 8 foot ceilings, 7 foot 6 in some corners that we had to admit, but it was really tough.
It's not good. Are they to be occupied?
Yes, definitely. There's like mail room, printing, there's back of house.
Not executive function. Well,
No, no executive functions at all in the base. Yes.
Can you talk about the capital and operating expenses that you received for this building, how it will compare to something quote unquote conventionally built in 2005?
I think Tom should take that one, and we should talk about the commissioning process and then how we're going to monitor this. But I actually think, it's going to be expensive to run this building, but I think we're going to see greater efficiencies than we can imagine.
Perform any of this compared to what a conventional building might be?
I did not hear a word of what you just said, so.
I think you're interested in finding out what are the life cycle costs of this building versus a building which may not follow the green building guidelines.
What's the cost to build this building per square foot?
That's a different question.
Yeah.
And then what are the estimated savings that you will accrue from benefits that will offset the higher capital costs up front?
The obvious is the energy savings. When you take a building of this size and you talk about the 24%, I think is what we ultimately reached in energy savings, that's a tremendous cost in operating expense. It's realized for the life of the building. So that's always payback. In terms of the initial investment, it was probably 1.5%, I think, of the overall cost of the project to implement the green and sustainable initiatives that we chose.
We had the great fortune of just being in the right place at the right time in terms of the market, so that when we were making choices, there were many more opportunities to choose products amongst them. And when it came down in prices, were relative in terms of choices that we had to make. The other thing to remember is this is 100% owner occupied by Hearst. So I'm not flipping the building. I'm not selling it, to the highest profit afterwards. This is our home. So that these are choices that are being made for the occupants, which, is different than a completely developer-driven building looking for, a quick return. So the long-term benefits are going to be for me many times over.
Actually, as far as the capital cost, I don't know, is Andy Sumel halfway in the audience? They've done a study in terms of what the increased capital costs of the building are, what buildings are when they try to go green. And as an architect, this is usually when I get into trouble when I talk about money. But I can tell you that just to become certified on a previous project which I've worked on, just to become certified really doesn't cost much, if anything at all. It really just requires a certain amount of conscious thinking and awareness on the part of the design team. But as you go towards, silver, gold, platinum, the cost goes up. And I don't know, it depends on exactly how far you want to go, but it increases then sort of on a parabolic curve.
Also depends on the size of the project. It's easier for a smaller project to go from
renovation project and a new project, are different grading system, different?
I'm sorry.
Right now, this project is like a commercial renovation, right?
Yes.
It's like you keep part of it and you build on top of that. So how you grade it? Like, you grade it as a renovation project, or you grade partial as a renovation and partial like new building, something? Because I don't know how we figure out these forms.
Now, this was done as a new construction project. Totally new construction. The other program, which is LEED for existing buildings, is, or LEED for commercial interiors. If you're taking an existing building and you're renovating the interior, I think that would come under commercial interiors. So, I mean, there are different programs.
I have a question about actually architectural design issues that it seems I don't decide what form or somehow building looks like. It's more about a structure driven kind of process than how to say that the building renovation or preservation process. Like, you do find any kind of connection between how you relate your new design back to this old building design? You consider structure?
John?
Yeah, I think there were a number of things in the one question, but it is related, obviously, and I think a lot has to do with the size of the floor plate, for example, and how this again relates to the existing building. We really wanted to step back because it was the base for a future tower, and there was a long exercise how big the floor plate wants to be. And when I said at the beginning, these two things, they inform each other, the green aspects and the physical aspects of the design. It's interesting, I saw it the other day. I was standing in the building and the sun hit directly the core wall, which is, for a New York tower, very, very unusual that you have direct sunlight on the core wall. And that means because our floor plate is modest for New York terms, it's probably medium-sized to large for European terms, for example. But it's modest for New York terms. We have full height glass that allows a lot of daylight, and a lot of energy gets wasted with you have to switch the lights on in many buildings. It's a big waste. So we have a lot of daylight coming in. We have a high performance glass which keeps the solar energy out. So it's this full glass aspect and the floor plate and all these together, how they relate to the base. It's not. I know that the structure is very expressed, but it's not only driven by structure. It's really, the whole design process is everything moves at that stage. Structure, environmental issues, everything moves, and you have to find your ground, and as you stagger forward, almost like find your right direction. And you have this constant information from the whole team. But it is a process where many things come together. It's not only structurally driven. I'm not quite sure whether I fully answered your question.
No, it's a good point. I mean, the green comes to play at the same time with all the studies that we looked at on how to improve productivity of the work. Get more natural lighting. So, they're working together. If you believe every study that you've read, by having all this natural light in, it's going to be a good thing for people that are producing products. We are blessed with very good views. There's no bad view of this building. So by having the tower set back, on one side we look at the product, it's not. And then on one other dimension, you're looking at the Hudson River. So there are gorgeous views no matter where you are. So you're sharing those views now with everyone by having transparency from one end of the building to the other, with light pouring through little workstations and everything else.
Maybe I missed that. What's the start height?
What's what height?
Floor to floor? 13'6".
And the floor plates are 18,000, which we took a survey. In some buildings we were at 9,000 square foot floors. In other buildings we were at 20,000 square foot floors. So do they work for every magazine or every function that we have? No, but they're nearly perfect. Both the editorial and the publishing side of the magazine can come together under one floor together.
And floor to ceiling is 9'6". Carol, how are we doing for time?
I would say maybe one or two more
Okay.
questions.
I think I've been ignoring the back, so the gentleman way at the back there.
Yeah, this is for Clyde and Hearst. What design tools did you use to do the energy analysis studies and the CFD analysis?
CFD simulations were done in DO2 for energy, and our simulation program we were using was no, I know. I'm trying to think which it was. We'd switched at that point from Phoenix to the other one. I don't recall right now, to be honest. You recall? No. Okay.
Hey, Tom was just telling me that there's a couple of them that are really stretching their arms.
This group in the middle, they're by the pole. Yeah.
I have more of a design question, and it's about the nighttime image of the building, and particularly exterior building floodlighting. I know that LEED really limits top light and floodlight of buildings, and I was wondering how that was addressed with this building.
Yeah, light pollution is a credit that we didn't get.
But the lighting of the building at night is very interesting. So why doesn't Mike just mention?
No, but it's a really good question, and I think it wouldn't be honest to say LEED isn't the only thing, isn't the only parameter in design on that building, and we found we want to give it a lighting, a very different lighting than in New York City. There's no building hasn't got a top as such, and the top is not lit therefore. But we emphasize the corners I was talking about, and we like the corners. And it's a high efficient lighting, but it is you can switch it off, but it is we're spending some of the energy to save.
Alex, what is the design? Call those lights?
We call those the Ferrari lights. They're actually lights that are incorporated into the corner pieces, the one that you saw being hoisted out of the truck. And somebody said, well, why do we call them Ferrari lights? And we told them that's because nobody knew how to spell Lamborghini. So
the issue of those lights and the LEED credit isn't over because if the way they're positioned in the bird's mouth, the top of the bird's mouth forms a canopy, and if the lights don't touch the night sky, then we qualify. So we actually were waiting to see what they look like. So,
Yeah.
I have a question. Apart from the lobby, were there any passive ventilation cooling systems in the tower?
Yeah.
And if there were or not, what's your judgment on such systems being feasible in North America, if they were popular in Europe?
We looked at the feasibility of double envelopes, natural ventilation, and things along those lines that you're familiar with in Europe, we'll say. They didn't pan out, right? If you look at the climates throughout the world, East Coast, look at the northeastern U.S., D.C., New York, Boston, they're rough summers, they're hot, they're humid. If you look at, say, even the East Coast of Asia, look at Korea, Japan, they're similar weather, very hot, humid summers. The available hours that you can get free cooling, natural ventilation, is it's not many. I think when we looked at it, you'd have 2 months of the year when you cannot achieve comfort conditions inside by bringing in just outside air or opening a window or means of natural ventilation. When everyone looks towards Europe, and really we should look at the west coast of the U.S., San Diego, California. The west coast continents tend to have mild weather, low humidity, low temperatures, tolerable temperatures in the summer, tolerable temperatures in the winter. And those climates lend themselves much more towards natural ventilation. So, as a in New York, I think you'd have a hard time in New York naturally ventilating a building, a modern office building, and being comfortable.
there's a really interesting study by Bureau Happold where they estimated the payback in a double wall, and I think it was 120 years over a conventional wall of New York.
Right. I mean, modern glass.
Yes, but there are other uses, but it's an interesting point, really. But
Right. I know it doesn't. But we're big fans of double walls.
The lady, yes.
I have a question about your experience in going after the LEED certification while going after the green building tax credit certification. Because one's a prescriptive system and one's like a performance-based system. So we do have a lot of challenges in making your incentives beat both parallel tracks.
I'm sorry, you questioned BREEAM, the European system of BREEAM? Is that what you questioned?
No, she was asking.
If I think it was USGBC versus NYSERDA, is that correct?
Versus NYSERDA and the green
Was
building
it
tax
particular for
credit.
NYSERDA and green building tax credits at the same time? Nobody go into effect.
So did you?
No, the green building tax credit was another layer, and it actually helped us in pursuing goal. When we saw what we had to do to meet the green building tax credit, it led us to other points within the LEED matrix that we were able to accomplish. So it was more intensive with commissioning. There were some structural issues that we had to take care of. One, for instance, they don't want any exposed installation in the airstream. What we saw when we saw the detail of how the curtain wall attaches to the slab edge, there's a small gap that has mineral wool, a fiber, that would be in the ceiling, and the ceiling's used to return air. We learned that we had to cap that whole thing so that that fiber wasn't in the airstream. The Green Building Tax Credit is a very smart program, and it helped us. It didn't hurt us at all. Some of it was added to the credits we achieved, and some of it was part of the innovations we saw. So it was a good marriage between the two.
We love to talk on land, but we have one more question. Yes. Right in the front, yeah.
Oh, thank you. I was curious to know where the glass is manufactured, and is the same glass used on all faces, like plates on that glass variously?
Yes, the glass was manufactured in Germany originally, was assembled in Luxembourg, was then put together in a panel in Italy, and was then shipped to New York.
Don't ask me where the stone came from.
Which same on all faces?
And since since we didn't want to quadruple that process, so we used the same glass on all faces. But it makes sense. It's a high-performance glass. It's a very good question. You can use different glass in different faces. It was for us important that the building has integrity, and as you look at it, and the corners, the way it goes.
But it's an excellent question, and to give that answer, it makes you think, well, we just pulled it out of weeks and weeks and months of studying and looking, and even trying desperately to find someone in the United States that could do this. And we could. And then we found the best, and I will tell you that Hearst did an excellent job. Hearst is.
That's the install. That's a cladding contractor who produced everything. But we certainly benefited from, in a way, that the Sheffield building is on one side, so I guess it gave us a lot of insulation. That was certainly a beneficial factor. We couldn't have done what we did. It was the building freestanding, in terms of that balance.
But we did send the CEO and a corporate jet to Europe to look at the colorization and the type of glass that was coming. We wanted to make absolutely certain that our green glass didn't actually